Okay. Check, check. One, two. We are live. We are alive. We are grateful. And thank you so much for being here. Welcome back, good people. Welcome back to the Inner Storyteller. I am Soul Expression, your humblest of hosts. And welcome back to the channels. Please consider subscribing. In fact, please do subscribe. In fact, you have to subscribe. Okay. I will come and find you, and you will be in big trouble if you don't subscribe. And like the video. Please like the video, especially in the first 10 minutes if you can. Okay? That's whether you're watching the replay or you're here with us live. Please just tap that thumbs up, okay? Put a thumbs up notification in YouTube's data center in Google's data center so that they know to push this content out to the good people of the world just like you. If you are here, you are in for real conversations. We talk about natural law. We talk about religion, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the great. We talk about money, anarchy, culture, and how mankind is manipulated from the shadows by forces that do not have our best interests at heart because they are completely evil. And we're not bashing faith systems here, okay? We're not calling people stupid for having or believing in a religion. We are simply examining the psychological affects and effects of the stories we have the most faith in, the ones we have the most stake in, and how those stories help shape society. That examination, of course, sits right alongside an honest look at the current human condition, which is slavery. Government is slavery, good people. And the question we have to keep coming back to is what can actually be improved with a proper understanding of the inner storyteller and how it works. Now, the inner storyteller is, of course, the title of this podcast, as well as the title of the project my life is consumed by now, right? I intend to not only um, sell a whole billion copies of the book titled The Inner Storyteller and finish finish creating and publishing the main video series of The Inner Storyteller. But also, I intend to pursue getting the inner storyteller philosophy um, and concept, the sort of concepts that surround the inner storyteller, as well as the vocabulary, the inner storyteller, and some of the vocab I introduce in my book into homeschooling and maybe even government schooling curriculum. Okay. And I want to spread my message far and wide as I believe this message was not just given to me, but given to you through me. And there's just a lot of potential for it. Now, today, we are, of course, continuing with our philosophical map series. We are moving on to part 3, and it is full steam ahead from here. Okay, this mini series, the philosophical map series, where I read aloud the various chapters of the companion book to the inner storyteller, the main book, the main text, if you will. This companion book is something that you read, most most ideally, you read this text after you read the inner storyteller. But on the podcast, of course, I'm going to riff on the concepts. I'm going to um, add more than just what's in the text itself. So don't worry about that. But basically, the philosophical map is something that I put together to help synthesize in your mind the philosophy in the actual book chapters. So it's just a little companion book, a nice little um, kind of reminder of what was broken down and how it was spaced out and how the philosophy works in this book. So, quick reminder for anyone joining, this companion text walks through the main manuscript section by section. It is not the book itself, it is the map of the book. So, today I am reading you from the map, part 3, and then we're going to sit with that and see what it's actually pointing at. So, without further ado, please like the video, please subscribe to the channels, help me in my quest to one day monetize my podcast. Let's get straight into it. Part 3 of the book, The Inner Storyteller, as well as part 3 of the companion text, is entitled The Story Beneath the Story. And let me share the image so that y'all can add to stage. Boom. Oh, no, wait. There we go. No, 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 no. There it is. So that y'all can have a visual to look at while I read this. Part 3 is where the manuscript begins demonstrating its central claim not only analytically, but experientially. After part 2 shows how populations can be steered through narrative, this chapter moves closer to the inner mechanism itself, the way stories shape perception before direct experience has a chance to correct them. Through themes such as distance, meaning distance between peoples and countries, and knowing what people far, far away are going through or struggling with. Themes such as othering, such as imagination, and the slow training of public perception, or what I call the collective inner storyteller. This chapter shows how the inner storyteller interprets what it cannot see clearly, and how fear, pardon me, becomes natural, or at least it feels that way, once a threatening story is attached to differences between yourself and another group of people. But this part does more than just describe that process. It begins revealing it from within through the warrior story, through the story of the Magi from the Bible, the three kings, if you will, in the Christmas story, and the mountain story featuring Trey, Will, and Sage. Those are character names. The manuscript shows how human beings do not merely receive meaning, they organize experience through story before they realize what they are doing. Again, the inner storyteller operates at the speed of thought. So it's before you hear thoughts that are interpreting the feelings and whatever else is going through your mind at the time. They are, there we go. We don't just receive meaning, we organize experience through narrative before we realize what we're doing. So these figures, Trey, Will, Sage, the Magi, and the Warrior, are not decorative. They're not trinkets. They are philosophical instruments in the book and in this chapter. The Magi and the Mountain story, especially, help reveal that truth is not always approached through one inherited route alone. Through Will and Sage, Trey is forced to confront the idea that different paths can converge on the same summit. In this way, the manuscript makes visible how tradition, free will, wisdom, fear, and interpretation begin shaping the inner storyteller long before a person believes that they are choosing a story freely. Part 3, therefore, deepens one of the manuscript's most central concerns, which is the most powerful stories are not always the ones we consciously defend, but instead are often the ones We rehearse inwardly until they begin organizing what feels true, safe, holy, sacred, possible, or dangerous and threatening. That's the sorting function, right? And this is also what prepares the reader for part four. Part four is entitled Candace Owens, whole chapter of the book dedicated to Candace Owens. Before truth can become embodied in public refusal, it must first be seen as something that can break through inherited framing from within. Part three, therefore, serves as a bridge between structural explanation and lived example. It reveals how the inner orientation is formed so that Candace Owens, part four, chapter four, can later appear not merely as a public figure or a political case study or a podcasting case study, but as an embodied example of what it looks like when conscience or when someone refuses the scripted meaning and is no longer passively inheriting narratives from the system, right? And lives their truth like Candace does. We have never seen a podcaster do or endure what Candace has done and endured with her show and with her life, especially post Charlie's assassination. But we're not here to talk about Candace. We are here to talk about part three. So let's slow down a few pieces of that. First of all, we talk about the way that stories shape perception before direct experience has a chance to correct the shape of the perception, right? This this is the whole episode in one line, and it's worth sitting with before we actually move forward. Most people assume that their understanding of something comes after they've encountered it directly. You meet a person, you form an opinion, you experience an event, you draw a conclusion. But that's backwards for most of what fills a person's worldview, right? For the vast majority of things you have an opinion about, like distant countries, distant cultures, historical periods you've never experienced because you weren't there, most people you've never met, the story arrives before the experience does, or the story arrives before the experience is interpreted. The direct experience never really comes since you're never there in the distant world and a distant country, whatever. And you never meet the celebrity or the historical figure that you're talking about, right? The direct experience isn't there. And the inner storyteller doesn't wait for a direct experience before deciding what something means. This is what I mean when I talk about how important it is to gain knowledge of self, to understand how you operate and how your mind shapes meaning. It's paramount. It's incredibly important, right? Your mind fills the gap between what you think about and what you've actually experienced with whatever narrative is available from what you have been exposed to. And that's not a flaw in the system necessarily. That is the system working as it was designed to work. The problem is whoever gets to influence that gap first writes what fills the gap, writes the narrative that fills the gap. Again, the gap between, you think about what's going on in Taiwan or something. Some news story comes out where this thing is happening over there in Taiwan. You've never been there. Let's say you've never been there, you've never read extensively about the culture and the people there. You've never really had interest, but now that there's a news story, you're paying a little bit attention. After you hear a couple words, you're going to start telling yourself a narrative about the people there, about what's going on, all of that. Yet, it's going to be a story filled in by guesswork. The problem with that, then that's not the problem. The problem is when that guesswork is filed into the true drawer in your mind. Okay. Now, let's talk about the warrior, the magi, and the mountain. These are three fictional stories that, or excuse me, the magi part is from the Bible. Okay. But the warrior and the mountain story are two fictional stories from me that I wrote into the chapter, part three of the book, that demonstrate what I'm talking about. And then the Magi, I actually use as an already established story to demonstrate something true about this reality and to show that even um, religious, to also show that religious text does feature real truth in a lot of ways. And I don't just mean historical, chronology. I mean, real deep truth that we can all relate to and should incorporate in our daily lives or implement the good parts of in our daily lives. So, the philosophical map, the companion text, calls these figures instruments, right? They're not decoration. And that distinction between decoration and actual instruments used matters. They're not mere illustrations added to make the philosophy easy to swallow or agreeable, right? They're arguing my point. The mountain story specifically is built to demonstrate something most religious and ideological systems resist admitting, which is that different paths, okay, different understandings, different ways of studying and scientifically discovering how the universe works can converge on the same summit. Different paths taken in good faith, in genuine pursuit of truth, can converge on the same mountain summit. Tradition, free will, and inner wisdom are represented by the characters Trey, that's tradition, Will for free will, and Sage for inner wisdom. And they aren't competing for the same prize. Okay. They are taking three different routes up the same mountain. And the view from the bottom before they start going towards the top, where it looks like there's only really one correct path, is only really a limitation of perception, right? Your position limits how much perception you have of the mountain. It's just like when you move to a new city and you have to rely so heavily on either maps or a GPS system. That's funny. There's a GPS system called Maps for short, Google Maps. But when you have to rely on either physical maps or MapQuest printouts or and revealing my age with that one, or you have to use your GPS, right? People say, "I'll just follow the blue line. I don't know where anything is," when they move to a new city. And then eventually your perception expands and you're able to go places without just following the blue line because you know that there's more than one way to get to your destination, right? So from the bottom of the mountain, it looked like there's one path. From the top of the mountain, you look down and you can see all of the paths converging on the same summit. And I want to be precise because what I'm not saying and what the book is very clear in distinguishing between is it's easy to hear that different paths converge and assume that that means anything goes. We don't have any rules in spirituality. We don't have to really commit to anything. There's no right answer, right? But no, there are at least definitely wrong answers for spirituality. So it's not that I'm saying that a Satanist and a truly devout, let's say devout Muslim, are heading in the same spiritual direction and that they can just converge at the same summit. That's not what I'm saying. Okay. The text is clear everywhere that the paths rooted in harm do not belong on this mountain at all. Convergence applies to genuine truth seeking traditions and ideologies, personal ideologies, arriving at the same summit through different symbolic systems, right? What we got to keep in mind is that religious texts, sacred texts, whether you believe them to be the actual word of God or just deep wisdom, right, inspired by the creator of some sort, doesn't matter what form you believe that these texts are in, they are they serve as symbols as far as their mechanical function. Okay, how they work in consciousness is they are a symbol, or they contain many symbols. They're a container for symbols. Religious texts, sacred texts, scriptures. My book does not flatten the difference between a path of care and a path of harm. How fear becomes natural once a threatening story is attached to it. Excuse me. How fear becomes natural once a threatening story is attached to the differences between you and distant people. This is the distance and othering mechanism that we talked about on this channel before, right? We talked about how people are screaming right now about data centers and the dangers of data centers and the water and things and the harm that this technological project is going to bring, not only the surrounding environments, but also it's going to give the companies producing them more and more means to create more and more of these things until everybody is suffering from bad water, bad air, bad food, and all of the effects. But a lot of the people, especially here in the United States, that are complaining about these things say nothing in regard to the Congo, the kids in the Congo that are producing and mining for the cobalt and other materials and minerals that are used to create our iPhones and our computers, like the one that I'm doing this podcast on right now, right? Nor did we say anything for years about the t-shirt factories. I'm wearing a t-shirt right now that was likely made in China or Bangladesh or somewhere where they have t-shirt factories, where a lot of women sometimes are, you know, unfortunately enslaved to these factories to be able to provide some for their family. All of it traces back to the same root, right? Difference alone never really produces hatred. Different food, different language, different ritual, none of that carries hostility on its own. Hostility arrives when a story gets attached to the difference. And when we are made to be apathetic to the suffering of others that we are benefiting from, there is bound to be a cognitively dissonant hatred or something akin to it that develops alongside it. Meaning, we start to develop a desire to stay separate from those people so that we don't have to confront the fact that we are benefiting from their suffering and saying nothing about their suffering and acknowledging nothing about their suffering. And excuse me, and once that's normalized, once that story is installed, fear doesn't like the conditioning. It doesn't feel like conditioning anymore. Fear starts to feel like common sense. And it starts to feel like the inner storyteller simply recognizing danger. And of course, we fear speaking out against our own government and against our own corporations in favor of the world becoming a better place. We fear that. We don't want to be isolated or kept out from the nice things in nice places. And that's the part uh worth catching in yourself, right? The fear that feels natural, fear that feels installed exactly the same way from inside. The only way to tell the difference is to go back and ask where the story came from in the first place. And this sets up part 4. Okay, but before we get into how it sets up part 4, I actually want to show you a little bit from part 3. Yeah, here we go. Want to show you a little bit from part 3 by reading to you the why aren't the little controls popping up? I need my Here we go. Okay. Part 3. Boom. The Fallen Mastermind. Now, I'm obviously producing and creating a video series where I'm reading the book, where it's the audio book slash video book, if you will, of the actual book. So I'm not going to read too much from any particular chapter on any particular episode of this podcast outside of the main video series, but I am getting ready to read you the bit from the Fallen Mastermind, um, because I want you to see what I'm showing the reader to get you excited to get your own copy of the book, The Inner Storyteller. So this is an excerpt from the actual book, The Fallen Mastermind. He woke up, drenched in sweat from unbearable heat. He felt exhausted, beaten, blinking slowly as consciousness crept back into his aching body. He felt the crushing truth immediately. Both ankles fractured, his broken feet pinned beneath the weight of quicksand. He tried lifting his leg, and the sharpest pain he'd ever felt surged through his body faster than he could keep up. His scattered memory started returning bit by bit: the battle, the chase, his capture. He realized this was the end. Too much time had passed before he finally awoke, and the quicksand had risen too high to escape. But he did not panic. As warrior, he chose not to despair. Looking down at his impossible position, he made a decision. His last hours would be spent mastering his mind to the fullest potential before he met his maker. Suddenly, he felt something begin to shift, something he'd never felt before. Yet it came as natural as his own breath. Even before his resolve could properly settle, something dormant awakened within him. An inheritance passed once every 7 generations of his bloodline. His brain began rebuilding its own cells. Perception suddenly sharpened. Soon after, a deep golden light spread through his body and he began to glow. As he approached an evolution, a new threshold of self mastery, his focus deepened to indescribable levels. His eyes became mirrors. Had his attackers still been there to look at them, they would have only seen themselves reflected back. Then it happened. just as his grandfather foretold when he was a boy. She came to him. Now pause. What is your mind asking? Is it whether this could happen, whether it should be believed, whether it is metaphor or memory, or simply is your mind asking, well, who is she? Who is she? Notice what the mind does. It reaches for interpretation, not sensation. It wants meaning, it wants resolution. It does not ask what the body feels, it asks what the story means. This is the mechanism religion, myth, marketing, and memory all rely on. Not facts, but narrative. Narratively framed experience. They set up a narrative and then permit only a narrowed lens for interpretation that doesn't disrupt the story. And this is how the most powerful spiritual systems in human history have been built, not on raw truth, but on stories capable of organizing meaning and feelings like fear, hope, guilt, and loyalty. This is why stories must be examined, not only for what they say, but for what they train the mind to become. So, as you can see, okay, that's a little excerpt from my book. I don't know if y'all can hear the cheering when I click my button here, but hopefully you can. That is from the book, and you can see I sort of demonstrate how when you're reading a story and when you're really into it and you're filling in the gaps and you're creating the images and exploring what the story looks like to you in your mind, what your mind is seeking is what the meaning is behind the truth, right? Not what the truth is behind the meaning. Your mind is seeking what the meaning is behind the truth, or what the meaning is behind what the experience is, to be more accurate. And so, keep that in mind as we continue. But this is how part 4 is all set up, because part 3 is the bridge, right? The companion text says something important at the end, that before truth can become embodied in public refusal, it first has to be seen as something that can break inherited framing from within. Before we have the confidence, the wherewithal, the know how, and the courage to stand up against the stories that we've been given and the storytellers, the people that are negatively influencing and causing the harm on earth, negatively influencing culture and causing us to be so chaotic. Before we can stand up to them and stand up to those stories, we have to view truth. We have to perceive truth as powerful enough to break the stories that we are holding within ourselves. That's the bridge. Part 3 is showing you how the inner orientation gets formed, right? Tradition, free will, wisdom, fear, interpretation, reflection, all of it is shaping the inner storyteller long before a person believes they are choosing the narrative themselves. Part 4 is going to show you what it looks like when someone in particular's conscience actually breaks through that inherited framing and refuses the script in real time with real cost. You can't understand what refusal really means, what rebellion really means, until you understand how deep the original framing goes within yourself. And that's what part 3 is giving you. And of course, the question we have to keep coming back to here is, what story are you willing to live? Let me know in the comments. And also, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channels. I do need you all to do that if I'm going to one day have a monetized podcast. But I will be here regardless, spreading the message, doing what I can. And yeah, I really appreciate you guys for sticking it out. Uh Today is, what is today? Wednesday? Today is Wednesday, so I will definitely see you tomorrow. And I think we're going to get into another heavy topic tomorrow. Also, remember this Saturday, I do have another interview coming up. We chatting it up with Miss Red. I met her on Instagram, MSRED_35. So we'll be chatting it up about truth and freedom and whatnot on Saturday. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the comments. Peace and love. I already know.